Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, May 1st, 2025. President Donald Trump announces that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will leave that position and be nominated as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, for now, will take on the second job of National Security Advisor. General Motors estimates tariffs will cost the company $5 billion in profits. President Trump speaks at a National Day of Prayer observance in the White House Rose Garden, taking time as well for an update on the tax cut, spending cut, border security budget reconciliation bill being finalized by the Republican Congress. Former Vice President Kamala Harris criticizes the Trump administration's first 100 days in a speech in San Francisco. About tariffs, she says the president is clearly inviting a recession. Senate Democrats plan to force a vote on human rights in El Salvador, their latest move in their effort to have Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was deported to an El Salvadorian prison, return to the U.S. And Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy outlined steps to increase the number of air traffic controllers. That and more coming up on Washington Today. Associated Press writes that President Donald Trump said Thursday that he's naming Secretary of State Marco Rubio as acting National Security Advisor to replace Mike Waltz, whom he is nominating for United Nations Ambassador. Trump announced the move shortly after news broke that Waltz and his deputy, Alex Wong, were departing the administration just weeks after it was revealed that Waltz added a journalist to a signal chat being used to discuss military plans. Trump said Rubio will continue to serve as Secretary of State. President Trump wrote on social media, "I am pleased to announce that I will be nominating Mike Waltz to be the next United States Ambassador to the United Nations from his time in uniform on the battlefield, in Congress, and as my National Security Advisor. Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. In the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Together, we will continue to fight tirelessly to make America and the world safe again." That's the post from President Trump, as reported by Associated Press. Mike Waltz posting on X, "I am deeply honored to continue my service to President Trump and our great nation." This all happened while the State Department briefing was underway, with spokesperson Tammy Bruce.
The president has just written on Truth Social that Mike Waltz is going to become the new U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, there you
no
go.
longer the National Security
Fabulous.
Advisor. And in addition to that, he says that in the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Do you know how long he's going to be serving in both roles?
It is clear that I just heard this from you. This is the magic.
No heads up that this was coming.
I have some insights as to the potential of certain things that might happen. But when the president, and this of course is all presidential decisions, right? So I'm with the State Department. It is, as I think would be clear to all of you, you don't want to get ahead of your skis in drawing conclusions or speculating about what may occur. And you can have a general sense of what's possible, and then you see that manifest usually. But I think the one thing I've learned is that things don't happen until the president says they're going to happen. So the fact that is, which was obviously Truth Social. Yeah, so that is the miracle of modern technology and the social media. So that is an exciting moment here. I think that, as I know Secretary Rubio, this is a man who, as I think you all know, has worn several hats from day one in managing the nature of what's happened here at the State Department, at USAID. And he's someone who's well known by the president. The president makes perfect assessments about who would implement his agenda. And in this case, he's chosen certainly the secretary and Mr. Waltz to facilitate his agenda moving forward. Not entirely surprising, I have to say, and good news for the American people.
You said you had some insights that this might happen. Could you just
elaborate
I think
on
that a little bit?
No, I can't. But thanks for asking.
Do you have any? How from the insights that you do have, knowing the secretary,
Sure,
and knowing this building, how do you see this working, and what advantages do you see with Secretary Rubio's experience in this new role?
Well, and also his experience certainly in the Senate for so long. He knows everyone in the city. He knows how the city and how the departments, how the government works. He has a great connection, certainly with, as a senator, with his constituents here in this building, with the people who work in this building, and with the American people now as they get to know him. So his experience also, really, we've seen him be at the White House several times a week. His close working relationship day to day with the president happens for a reason, because they work well together. They clearly have been in an environment where they've gotten to know each other very well. And we've seen the secretary operate we have to admit, these last 100 days, it's like hanging on to a freaking bullet train. I mean, it is a fast dynamic with people who have a journey that is set with a goal that has been determined. And it's staffed with men and women who understand what the agenda is and how to get it done. Now, this is obviously the president knows everybody in his cabinet, and all those cabinet members have staffs, and every department has people that he gets to know and that make a difference in how the departments work. So when we think about how is Secretary Rubio going to do this, well, it's like, how does President Trump run the United States? You have people around you. It's not just you. Right? These aren't single individuals working every day and you pulling the levers. It's about managing people. It's about assigning people to the right roles, as the president has just done. And if anybody can do it, certainly with the secretary, as I've gotten to know him, it will be Marco Rubio.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce at her news conference as the news was breaking from President Trump's post that National Security Advisor Michael Waltz will be leaving that position, be nominated for U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as the interim National Security Advisor. Congressman Brian Mast, Republican from Florida, chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, posting on X, outside of Elise Stefanik, there is no one in Washington the unaccountable UN bureaucrats fear more than Mike Waltz. He will fight to put America first every single day at the UN. Elise Stefanik is a Republican congresswoman from New York who was initially nominated by President Trump for the UN ambassador position, but that was withdrawn. Earlier in the day, before the president's post, various news organizations were citing sources that Michael Waltz would soon depart. Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island, Armed Services Committee ranking member, spoke on the Senate floor, saying that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth should also be held accountable for what has been called Signalgate, the discussion on the unsecure Signal app about military plans.
And just hours ago, we learned of press reports that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will be fired this week because of his own actions around the Signal incident. If true, I welcome the message of accountability that it sends. Mr. Waltz made a significant mistake in adding a reporter to a sensitive Signal chat, and his failure of judgment could have had serious national security consequences. But I respect that he took responsibility for his mistake and paid the cost, apparently. In contrast, Secretary Hegseth has refused to take responsibility for his own misconduct, in which my view was far more egregious than that of Mr. Waltz.
Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island, Armed Services Committee ranking member, on the Senate floor just before it was made official by the president that Mike Waltz would leave, but not be fired. He would be then nominated for a U.S. ambassador to the UN. Associated Press writing that President Trump and the White House, which insisted that no classified information was shared on the text chain, have stood by Waltz publicly throughout the episode. But the embattled National Security Advisor was also under siege from personalities such as Laura Loomer, who had been complaining to administration officials that she had been excluded from the vetting process for National Security Council aides. In her view, Waltz relied too much on neocons, referring to hawkish neoconservatives within the Republican Party, as well as others who Loomer argued were not MAGA enough types. As reports began to circulate that Waltz could be leaving the administration, Loomer appeared to take credit in a post on the social media site X, writing, "Scalp." That from AP. This is Washington Today. Detroit Free Press reports that General Motors, issuing new guidance on financial expectations for 2025, said tariff expenses are likely to hack away up to $5 billion in previously expected profits. GM's new forecast comes 2 days after pulling previous guidance issued in January, which did not account for automotive tariffs. GM delayed its earnings call until President Trump signed 2 executive orders April 29th, offering automakers what he called a little bit of help on tariffs. That was from Detroit Free Press. Deputy White House Press Secretary Stephen Miller was asked about this at a White House news conference.
Stephen, this morning GM is putting a dollar figure on how much the president's tariffs will impact the company. The CEO says tariffs will cost GM between $4 and $5 billion this year. The CEO of Ford says he can't commit to not raising prices because of tariffs. Is the administration open to doing more to give automakers relief?
The question, unfortunately, misses the entire point, which is that U.S. automakers have announced dramatic investments and expansions inside the United States. American auto plants are growing, they are expanding, they're opening new facilities, they're expanding existing facilities that are already in operation, because it is now the case that for the first time in our lives, that American cars receive preference in America's markets. The U.S. auto industry used to control the entire world. I believe the number during the heyday was that 70% of all cars in the world were made in Michigan. And now, of course, we've become a tiny fraction of the global market. And the reason for that is because the United States opened its markets to every single foreign cheater and every single foreign nation that subsidized its goods on the face of the earth, and their markets have been closed to ours. Japan closed their market to our cars. The entire EU closed their market to our cars. South Korea closed their market to our cars. All of the countries I just mentioned have tens of billions of dollars of annual trade deficits in automobiles with the United States. These are supposedly pure nations, nations that have at least a somewhat equivalent per capita GDP. So it is impossible under the terms of fair trade, if you have 2 nations with similar per capita GDP, to have such uneven trade flows in automobiles. What the president has done with his car tariff, we have the most desirable market in the world, is if you want to sell cars tariff-free, tax-free to our market, your plant has to operate in the United States. The only alternative to that is to have no U.S. automobile industry whatsoever, which is where this was headed, to be clear. If we stayed on this current path, within a few years, there would have been no U.S. automobile industry. And what little was left of it would have been in Mexico. Because U.S. auto companies have steadily been shifting their supply chains to Mexico, where they believe it is cheaper to make their products. In reality, it'll be cheaper to make them here because there'll be no tariff for anything made in the United States, and we'll have the cheapest energy and the best regulatory environment in the face of the earth.
But in the meantime, while manufacturing ramps up, American consumers may pay more. Do you agree?
Not on cars they won't, because again, there's now a massive economic incentive for automobile producers to expand production in the United States, and whatever they make here, there will be no tariff.
Deputy White House Press Secretary Stephen Miller at a White House news conference. General Motors CEO Mary Barra said the company does not necessarily expect to pass on the estimated up to $5 billion in tariff costs to car and truck buyers. She told CNN, "We believe pricing is going to stay at about the same level as it is. Pricing changes in our industry at least monthly and sometimes more frequently. We're going to respond to the market." Tariffs were a prime topic at today's confirmation hearing for Treasury Deputy Secretary nominee Paul DeBar before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. This question from Chair Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas.
So as you and I discussed in my office yesterday, the president and this administration has 2 paths before it. One path that I think is very, very positive, one path that I think is very, very negative. The positive path, I think President Trump right now has extraordinary leverage, unprecedented leverage, to negotiate lower tariffs from our trading partners in exchange for lowering the tariffs that he has threatened to impose on them. I think if we end up 30, 60, 90 days from now in a world where we've got markedly lower tariffs across the globe, that would be an historic victory for Americans, for American jobs, for American workers. On the other hand, the second path we could go down is a path that maintains very high tariffs in perpetuity, American tariffs on all of our trading partners, and we can expect retaliatory tariffs from our trading partners. I believe that would be a very bad path. I believe that would be a path that would hurt Texas and would hurt America. What is your view? Which path is preferable for the administration to take?
The president has been very clear. I'm supportive of the president's positions on the different drivers of trade. and the different potential accomplishments of trade. One of them may be to drive down barriers and tariffs, tariffs and non-tariff barriers in our trading counterparties. Another one is to reindustrialize the U.S. as we lost significant amount of jobs, especially since the WTO acquisition of the PRC drove down industrial jobs. The third one is national security. I think yourself and many others here talk about the national security impact of the trade deficits. And the last one is potentially revenues. I am not certain of the exact negotiations between various parties, but I could certainly see that some negotiations may be more focused on the accomplishment of one or two of those, and some might be others. For example, I've testified many times before the Senate about China and national security issues, and I certainly think that when we talk about the PRC, national security and reindustrialization is going to be much more focused as a likely outcome of negotiations.
I recognize you will not be the ultimate decision maker when it comes to the president's trade policy, but you will be one of the voices in the room, and it is my hope that you will be a voice in the room advocating for using these tariffs as leverage to secure freer and fairer trade, because I think that's the right direction for the administration to go.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, chair of the Commerce Committee, questioning Treasury Deputy Secretary nominee Paul DeBar at today's hearing. As a story from CNBC, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is urging the Trump administration to immediately implement a tariff exclusion process in order to keep the U.S. economy from falling into a recession and inflicting irreparable harm on small businesses. In a letter first obtained by CNBC, the massive business lobbying group asked key Trump trade officials to automatically lift tariffs on all small business importers and on all products that cannot be produced in the U.S. or are not domestically available. That story from CNBC. Wall Street today, the Dow up 83, NASDAQ up 264, S&P up 35. USN today confirmed Frank Bisignano, CEO of the financial technology company Fiserv, to be Social Security Administrator. The vote was party line 50-45, Republicans voting yes, Democrats and independents voting no. President Donald Trump today spoke at a National Day of Prayer observance in the White House Rose Garden. A 1952 law reads, the president shall set aside and proclaim a suitable day each year other than a Sunday as a national day of prayer on which the people of the United States may turn to God in prayer and meditation at churches, in groups, and as individuals. Here's the president.
In a letter to wife Abigail, John Adams wrote of his first National Day of Prayer, millions will be upon their knees at once before their great Creator, imploring his forgiveness and blessing and asking for his favor on the American cause. Beautiful. Today, more than 2.5 centuries later, in the heart of a free and proud America, we rejoice that God answered those prayers. And I think God answered other prayers because he's put in an administration to run this country that's going to make you proud again. It's going to make you believe and believe more again. And we're going to have a country that's very strong. We're already in just 100 days. We're respected all over the world. Every leader's calling, want to have a meeting, appointments. They weren't calling so much last few years. They had no respect for our country. Our country was doing very, very poorly, as you know.
President Donald Trump at the National Day of Prayer in the White House Rose Garden. Throughout his speech, he spoke not only about prayer and religious freedom, but also parts of his administration's agenda, from tariffs to immigration to military recruitment. He spent a few minutes on budget reconciliation. That's the bill the Republican-led Congress is putting together to incorporate tax cuts, spending cuts, and money for the border and other priorities.
Before we begin, I want to let you know what I was just doing in a really great meeting with Speaker Johnson. We had also Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Chairman Brett Guthrie, who's a fantastic guy, and Chairman Smith. Everybody knows Chairman Smith. He's the most knowledgeable person on taxes and finances there is, to be updated on the progress of the one big, beautiful bill. We love that bill. I won't like it if it doesn't pass, neither will you. If it doesn't pass, your taxes are going to go up 68%. So think of it, 68, and this is a religious ceremony to me, but that's part of the religion. Because if your taxes go up 68%, you might give up your religion. You might have no choice. You'll be working too hard to try and make it. And that's the Democrats. That's what they'll give you. They'll vote against it. It's not even believable. It's called Trump derangement syndrome because, honestly, everything in there is good for Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else. These will be the biggest tax cuts in American history with 100% expensing, which is something that people cannot believe they're getting. We did it in the last one, and we had the most successful economy in my first 4 years that we've ever had, the history of our country. And expensing was one of the things that led to that. But it's 100% expensing for companies investing in America and increasing take-home pay for the typical family by thousands of dollars a year. And to show you how middle income this is, there'll be no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax for the great seniors in Social Security. So you have no tax on Social Security for our great seniors. And we have full deduction for interest. If you buy a car that's made in America, you get an interest rate deduction. That's going to be it's got to be made in America. If it's not made in America, we really don't care if you buy it or not. But if it's made in America, we want you to buy it. We make the best cars anyway. Things are moving along very well, and I just wanted to say the final details are coming together, and they're coming together rapidly, and I think we're right on schedule, Mike and everyone. And I want to thank you and this group and all of the people that are over there right now, not in the sun. They're working on the bill. It will be the biggest bill ever passed in the history of our Congress, our Senate, and Congress. That's a big achievement. One of the things that's very important will be saving Medicaid for Americans in need. We will not let the Democrats destroy it and all the waste, fraud, and abuse that they seem to love. And they will decimate Medicaid if they get the chance. We're not going to give them that chance. So just remember, we will be saving Medicaid and strengthening it. It'll be actually very strengthened. And they are going to decimate it. We can't let it happen. And very simply, to finish that, we will make America rich and healthy again. And why don't we say rich, healthy, and religious again, okay? Shall I add that for this group? Right, Dan Patrick?
President Donald Trump in the White House Rose Garden, a piece of his larger speech in recognition of the National Day of Prayer. Punchbowl News is reporting breaking news. The House Republican leadership has delayed two markups they wanted to hold next week. Energy and Commerce Committee and Ways and Means Committee will no longer hold their markups next week. Leadership now hopes the panels will hold the markup the week of May 12th, and that relates to parts of the budget reconciliation package. From NBC News, marking her return to the public sphere, former Vice President Kamala Harris sharply condemned the first 100 days of President Donald Trump's second term Wednesday, saying he had pulled America to the verge of a constitutional crisis, devastated the economy, and abandoned world allies. Harris delivered the remarks in the keynote address at the Emerge 20th Anniversary Gala at Palace Hotel in San Francisco, honoring the group's role in electing more Democratic women to California politics. That was from the NBC News article. Here's a portion of former Vice President Harris's speech.
We all know President Trump and his administration and their allies are counting on the notion that fear can be contagious. They are counting on the notion that if they make some people afraid, it will have a chilling effect on others. But what they're overlooking, what they have overlooked, is that fear is not the only thing that's contagious. Courage is contagious. The courage of Americans who are banding together in the face of the greatest man-made economic crisis in modern presidential history. Americans across the political spectrum who are declaring that the president's reckless tariffs hurt workers and families by raising the cost of everyday essentials, devastate the retirement accounts that people spent a lifetime paying into, and paralyze American businesses, large and small, forcing them to lay off people, to stop hiring or pause investment decisions. The courage of Americans we are seeing who are rallying at Social Security offices to protect their hard-earned benefits. Of Americans who are speaking out to say, it is not okay to violate court orders. Not okay. Saying it is not okay to detain and disappear American citizens or anyone without due process. The courage of judges to uphold the rule of law in the face of those who would jail them. Of universities that are defying unconstitutional demands that threaten the pursuit of truth and academic independence.
Kamala Harris, former vice president and former 2024 Democratic presidential nominee, Wednesday night in San Francisco. LA Times writes that Harris's roughly 15-minute speech at a fundraiser for Emerge, which focuses on electing female Democrats, comes amid mounting speculation about whether she will run for California governor in 2026 to replace termed-out Governor Gavin Newsom. Harris has been criticized by top Democrats already in the race for not announcing her intentions thus far. Harris, 60 years old, could forego that race and instead decide to run for president for a third time in 2028. That was from the LA Times. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Senate Democrats plan to force a vote in the coming weeks that would require more transparency of the Trump administration's deportations to El Salvador. That's the first line from an article at Spectrum News. It goes on, as a first step Thursday, a group of 4 senators filed a privilege motion that would force the State Department to issue a human rights report on El Salvador following the Trump administration's refusal to return wrongly deported Maryland resident Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Again, that was the article from Spectrum News. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, explained at a news conference.
This is not something that the Article I branch can take lying down. When a president of the United States is flouting a 7-2 Supreme Court order and saying he doesn't have the power to retract a mistake that his administration admits he's made and thinks that's the end of the story, we're here to say that is not the end of the story. There is a privileged motion that any senator can file, that Senator Van Hollen and I, together with Senator Schumer and Senator Padilla, are filing today to force the State Department, the Trump administration, to issue a human rights report about El Salvador. This is a little-used privilege motion, but it's designed like the other privileges are designed to enable the Article I branch to check executive overreach. In this case, President Trump has facilitated the deportation of American residents, many here completely lawfully, to El Salvador without due process. In some instances, people who are being deported by mistake, as the administration admits. And the president has even gone beyond this and said that he would like to cut a deal to send U.S. citizens to be imprisoned in El Salvador. So we are filing a resolution today under Section 502BC of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 to require the State Department to issue a report on the situation about human rights in El Salvador, particularly the conditions in the prison where Americans are being held, whether El Salvador is taking steps together with the administration to facilitate compliance with the Supreme Court's ruling. Are they interested in following the rule of law or not? This is a procedure where within 10 calendar days this becomes a business of the Senate that we can take up. We're guaranteed a vote on it, and we will seek a vote on it at a time that our leader, Senator Schumer, will negotiate with Senator Thune.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, at a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol. He also answered a reporter's question about this news, as reported by CNN. A Donald Trump-appointed federal judge in Texas ruled that the president unlawfully invoked the Alien Enemies Act and blocked the administration from quickly deporting some alleged members of a Venezuelan gang. U.S. District Judge Fernando Rodriguez of the Southern District of Texas said Trump had unlawfully invoked the sweeping 18th century wartime authority to speed up some deportations. His decision means Trump cannot rely on the law to detain or deport any alleged members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua within his district. That was from CNN. Back to Senator Tim Kaine.
Trump-appointed federal judge in Texas just ruled that the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to force with deportations is illegal, saying that it's only supposed to be used when we're under an actual armed attack. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not surprised at that ruling. The Alien Sedition Act was designed for a very particular purpose, and like so many laws, like the IEPA law, we had a vote on tariffs last night. That law allows the president to declare a state of emergency, but nothing in the law allows the imposition of tariffs, essentially attacks at the say-so of one person. So President Trump doesn't really care about the law, but I'm glad that judges, even those appointed by President Trump, are standing up against him. We need courts, Congress, states, activism, and elections to work together to check the tendencies toward tyranny in this presidency.
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat of Virginia, at a news conference on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol, joined by Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, and also the minority leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York. New York Times wrote Wednesday about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Trump administration recently sent a diplomatic note to officials in El Salvador to inquire about releasing a Salvadoran immigrant whom government officials had been ordered by the Supreme Court to help free, according to 3 people with knowledge of the matter. But the authoritarian government of Nayib Bukele, the leader of El Salvador, said no. 2 of the people said. The Bukele administration claimed the man should stay in El Salvador because he was a Salvadoran citizen, according to one of those people. That was from the New York Times on Wednesday. Today, at the White House briefing, Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor, asked about it.
One on Abrego Garcia, please. The administration is reportedly inquiring about his return. Is that to check a box for compliance, or does President Trump want him back on U.S. soil, or both?
So, as Secretary Rubio said yesterday in the cabinet meeting, this administration is not going to publicly discuss the inside details of our foreign policy and negotiations with a foreign country. And in particular, we are not going to allow a district court judge to try to become the Secretary of State. Secretary Rubio is the one who, under his leadership and direction at the State Department, is managing the day-to-day relationship with El Salvador. Let's just take a moment, number one, to express our gratitude to El Salvador for agreeing to take some of the most dangerous terrorists off of America's streets and to put them into a safe environment where they cannot continue to engage in acts of terrorism or coordination with the Maduro regime. You may have seen recently an FBI assessment that was unclassified that said that the Maduro regime is using and planning to use Tren de Aragua terrorists to carry out assassination plots on American soil. Now, very few in this room covered that. I'll let you all ask yourselves why you didn't cover it and why your editors didn't assign that story to you. Something I think you should think about on your own. But this is a earth-shattering piece of news. The Biden administration imported a terrorist army that our own FBI assesses is planning assassination strikes on American soil against critics of the Maduro regime. Those are the terrorists that President Trump is finding and apprehending that our Democrat judges and Democrat activists are trying to keep on U.S. soil. Tren de Aragua has the same legal status as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. MS-13 has the same legal status as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. These are foreign terrorists operating on our soil. And our gratitude to El Salvador for agreeing to take custody of these terrorists is immense. With respect to the case that you mentioned, there's now even been more evidence that has been made public of this person's violent, repeated threats and assaults against his spouse, someone who had repeated, documented human trafficking and human smuggling offenses, somebody that has extensively documented membership in MS-13, a terrorist organization, and of course he had MS-13 tattooed on his knuckles. This is a person that was a clear and present danger to the safety of the American people. And it is a sad reflection on the state of our media and many of the outlets represented in this room that you obsessively try to shill for this MS-13 terrorist. Well, no coverage occurred in your papers about any of the Americans that were raped and tortured and murdered by the illegals that Biden was importing into our country.
White House Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller at today's White House briefing. Miami Herald has an article, a 6-day immigration sweep in Florida last week resulted in the arrest of 1,120 people across the state, an operation that state and federal officials described Thursday as the largest of its kind to date and a warm-up for future immigration enforcement operations. Governor DeSantis said at a news conference, "We believe this is just the beginning. The best is yet to come." Trump administration has only released the names of 10 individuals, citing a policy of not disclosing private identifying information. But U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials said that 63% of those arrested have a criminal record, and the rest all have final orders of removal from the country. The immigrants are primarily from Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, Venezuela, and El Salvador. That's an article from Miami Herald. This is Washington Today. From USA Today, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy held a press conference Thursday to outline the agency's plans to boost air traffic control hiring at the Federal Aviation Administration. He acknowledged that across the airspace, the FAA is short about 3,000 controllers, but said the DOT has a roadmap to boost hiring over the next few years and insisted that air travel remains safe in the meantime. Reporting from USA Today, here's Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy.
Today we're announcing that we are going to improve this pipeline for new hires into air traffic control. First off, the military, they train up a lot of air traffic controllers. We get a percentage of them that come in to civilian air traffic control. We have a plan to bring in more military air traffic controllers. I don't want them to go take a different job. I want them to come in and continue the skills that they've learned in the military, continue to use those skills in the civilian airspace. We have new opportunities for those military air traffic controllers, a better pathway into the system and a better pathway to pick locations that work for them. So that's going to be important, bring in more military air traffic controllers. We're going to provide incentives. So not only do we pay 30% more for those students who go to the academy, when you graduate from the academy, right, and you pass it's basically like a bar exam, you pass your exit exam to go into a facility, we're going to give those new graduates a $5,000 bonus. Again, incentivizing them to stick through the process, go through graduation, and then start the work of becoming a certified air traffic controller. We also want to reward academy graduates that are going to go to harder to fill locations. So one, I don't want to give a hard time to Albuquerque, but a lot of people don't want to go to Albuquerque. I wouldn't mind going to Albuquerque, but if there's harder places to staff up, we're going to give bonuses to controllers that are willing to go to harder staffing locations. Albuquerque might be one. So again, if we can't staff up locations, we're going to give bonuses to those locations to get air traffic controllers to go there. But I think the most important part of this, again, this is the phase that says let's get more air traffic controllers, in the pipeline, get trained up and get certified. Well, it's going to take us time to do that. All of this is going to take time. But I thought, as I was thinking through this, I'm like, the key part of the solution is the current air traffic controllers that we have. We have many air traffic controllers. They're fantastic. They're great at their jobs. They get to an eligible point of retirement, and they take that retirement. And so as this team has thought about, well, if we need to get more controllers in our towers, why don't we try to incentivize those really well-experienced air traffic controllers? Let's incentivize them to stay. Let's get them to stay on. Not only do we have that experience, but they can also help train up those younger, newer controllers coming into their facility. And so I'm happy to announce that we have struck a deal with NATCA. They've been great partners through this process. And we are going to give a upfront substantial bonus for those controllers who are eligible to retire to actually stay on.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, part of his news conference in Washington, D.C. today. Air traffic controllers must retire at 56 years old, but many do retire earlier. And he mentioned NATCA, that's the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, the labor union. Duffy also said that the FAA has streamlined the process to get applicants into the air traffic program at the FAA Academy in Oklahoma City. He said trainees there have historically had a 35% washout rate, and that the Transportation Department and FAA are collaborating to try to reduce that number. Story from the Washington Examiner. House Republicans have voted to reel back federal protections for a California longfin smelt, which President Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized in his long-standing feud with Governor Gavin Newsom. House Representatives voted 216 to 195 to remove the endangered species status for the San Francisco Bay Delta District population of longfin smelt. 3 Democrats voted in favor. 1 Republican voted against. The tiny fish, which is 3.5 to 4.3 inches in length, is found along the Pacific coast from Northern California all the way to Alaska, has a lifespan of up to 3 years, and has seen its population dramatically decline due to habitat loss caused by changes and declines of freshwater flow into the San Francisco Bay. That's the reporting from the Washington Examiner. The bill's sponsor, Congressman Doug LaMalfa, Republican of California, said during the House debate that the result has been not enough water for farmers in his district.
We want to block the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service misguided decision to list the San Francisco Bay Delta population of the longfin smelt as being endangered. Now, what we have is actual evidence. A former director of Stanford's Center of Conservation Biology wrote a piece on this listing, including these highlights. The Fish and Wildlife Service abandoned its allegiance to using the best available scientific information. The proposed listing ignores salient information gaps and shrugs off technical peer-reviewed criticisms that go to the heart of the argument for listing the species. To list a species, the Fish and Wildlife Service employed unreliable data, presented results from analyses that cannot be justified, and made troubling predictions for the fate of the fish that are built on flawed assumptions akin to a house of cards. Fish and Wildlife Service used piecemeal data to try and establish population trends and size of this using detection methods not even designed for longfin smelt to justify this action. Basically, no science, and this has long been sought by environmental groups since they've run out of the regular smelt after tens of millions of acre-feet of water have flowed out to the delta. Indeed, they need to be looking more at the issues going on with the effluent coming out of Bay Area cities from underpowered sewer systems that is affecting the delta so negatively, not some idea that farmers are getting too much water. At a point where farmers are now just got bumped up to a 50% allocation here the other day by state and federal water managers, we're seeing that it's going to negatively affect the food supply, not only for California and its production, but for the whole country. Now, we have statistics that show that the amount of water flowing into the delta is hardly being tapped. Indeed, 80% of it goes right on out the delta into the Pacific Ocean.
Congressman Doug LaMalfa, a Republican from California, on the House floor. Congressman Jared Huffman, Democrat of California, the Natural Resources Committee ranking member, opposed this bill, and he tied it to other steps the Republican Congress and President Trump are taking when it comes to rural areas.
Removing protections for the longfin smelt will not make it rain. It will not rebuild California's snowpack. It won't refill our reservoirs, not even the reservoir that President Trump recently drained in a public relations stunt that had nothing to do with fighting fires or water supply. California's water shortages are driven by climate change and also prolonged drought, aging and outdated infrastructure, and over-allocation. It's not the fault of some tiny fish. Meanwhile, farmers, including those in my district, are grappling with worsening droughts, wildfires, floods, extreme weather, and now the fallout from President Trump's disastrous trade policies for agriculture. All the while, Republicans won't talk about any of those things. Instead, they bring us here to debate whether a small fish should be allowed to go extinct or be protected under the Endangered Species Act. And all the while, the significant damage that their policies are causing continue to pile up in rural America, including President Trump's tariffs. He's treating not just our adversaries, but some of our neighbors and our best friends in the world like their enemies. He's turning them into adversaries. Tariffs on key trading partners. These have already cost farmers tens of billions of dollars in lost exports. They're shrinking markets. They are soaring input costs. They're going to make it hard for farms to stay in business. We see the sweeping budget cuts and mass layoffs at critical agencies like NOAA and the Bureau of Reclamation, threatening the services that farmers depend on. Water deliveries, weather forecasting, climate data, and much more. Farmers need that stuff. They don't want to go back to the Farmer's Almanac in order to make key business decisions. We see hundreds of millions of dollars in water supply infrastructure projects suddenly in limbo because of DOGE, while our colleagues across the aisle say nothing. We see the entire rural health care safety net, including nursing home care, including services that anyone with a person with disabilities and their families depend on, all of that in limbo as we brace for catastrophic cuts from Republicans as they try to fund their tax cuts for billionaires.
Congressman Jared Huffman, Democrat from California, on the House floor. This bill to remove federal Endangered Species Act protections for the California longfin smelt did pass 216 to 195. It's now been sent to the Senate. This is one of a series of bills the House and Senate are taking up in the first months of the year under the Congressional Review Act to repeal regulations from the Biden administration. Today, the Senate passed one and sent it to the president. It would repeal an Energy Department energy efficiency rule for commercial refrigeration equipment. Senate vote was party line, 52 to 45. House had passed it in March. President Trump does plan to sign it into law. Washington Post reporting Wednesday night that Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. intends to shift the way vaccines are tested, a move that the agency said will increase transparency, but that medical experts fear could limit access to vaccines and undermine the public's trust in immunization depending on its implementation. The potential change outlined in a statement says all new vaccines will be required to undergo placebo testing, a procedure in which some people receive the vaccine and others receive an inert substance, such as a saline shot, before the results are compared. That was from the Washington Post article. Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat of Hawaii, spoke about this today on the Senate floor.
Yesterday, the Health Secretary, RFK Jr., announced that the department would subject all new vaccines, including vaccines for children and vaccines with well-researched diseases like measles and polio, to placebo testing. So what does that mean? It means that they would take a bunch of kids, divide them into two groups, and give some of the kids the vaccine for rubella and mumps or polio, and then they would take the other half and give them a placebo. A dummy vaccine that doesn't work. It's not supposed to work. And then they would study how the kids fared to let the disease process continue. Let me tell you something about my father. My father was the only doctor on the record for the first couple of years after the Tuskegee experiments on African-American men, in which they withheld life-saving medicine from hundreds of African-American men, believing that they were expendable, to, quote, observe the disease process. What they are contemplating, and I don't know how serious this is, but what they are contemplating is that at scale with children. I am hoping that the department clarifies today that's not what they meant. That is fake news. But as of now, They are contemplating population-wide experiments on children to see how the disease process progresses. There should be 100 United States senators opposed to that. And I pray that they back off of this by the end of the day.
Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat of Hawaii, on the Senate floor. Scripps News has a statement from Health and Human Services Deputy Press Secretary Emily G. Hilliard. The CDC's own research has shown that the post-licensure surveillance system captures fewer than 1% of vaccine injuries. It's a system that was designed to fail. HHS is now building surveillance systems that will accurately measure vaccine risks as well as benefits, because real science demands both transparency and accountability. Story today from AP. President Trump's administration released a lengthy review of transgender health care on Thursday that advocates for a greater reliance on behavioral therapy rather than broad gender-affirming medical care for youths with gender dysphoria. The new best practices report is in response to an executive order from President Trump issued days into his second term that says the federal government must not support gender transitions for anyone under age 19. That was from AP. And finally, never too early to plan for the annual Capitol Hill tradition, the congressional baseball game. Congressman Roger Williams of Texas, the manager for the Republican team, made this announcement at the end of a news conference on Capitol Hill on a different subject.
Nice. Thank you, Skipper.
Well played.
And do you have an announcement about June 11th?
Well, June 11th now, getting down to the real important stuff. June 11th is our congressional baseball game, in place since 1909, all right? You all need to buy your tickets. They went on sale at 1 o'clock, and I'm projecting, you can write it down, we're going to have 40,000 people there this year to watch the Democrats and Republicans. I'm not going to tell you who's going to win, but I think you know who's going to win.
I think we know.
Thanks, Skipper.
Thank you, Coach.
Okay.
Thank you.
Congressman Roger Williams, Republican of Texas. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.